Hi, I'm Teresa Hauk, Executive Editor of the Journal from Rockwell Automation and our partner network magazine. Today I'm talking with Cody Ban, Director of Engineering at WIN-911. Thanks for joining me, Cody. I'm really glad you're here to talk with me today.
Oh, thanks for having me, Teresa. It's lovely to be here.
So I think a lot of people hear the word cybersecurity and think of computers being hacked, but there's a lot more nuanced cybersecurity concerns that processors should be worried about. What steps can manufacturers take to improve their cybersecurity?
Sure. Well, as a software developer, at least in a previous life, I'm very keenly aware of the need to patch software, the need to keep your software updated. That's a point that I really want to stress. It's always kind of top of mind for me, just from my bias and my perspective. I think it's critical to keep those operating systems, the SCADA systems, any plant software like alarm notification software that's critical for your process or your assets to function. Those have to be kept up to date, all the way down to firmware for panels and the SQL running your historian. That technology stack is ever more complex, and the threat landscape is constantly evolving. Change is a constant in engineering, especially in software engineering, and a large part of what software developers are doing is updating their technology stack, updating their components to make sure that the latest version of their software not only has the features and the fixes you come to expect, but is more robust against those latest threats as well. So it's definitely very important to keep software up to date. From a nuanced perspective, I would say, most cybersecurity attacks tend to start not with software vulnerabilities, but with human vulnerabilities, that they exploit social engineering. And really low-hanging fruit here for every organization is just to send every member of the organization through cybersecurity awareness training. And these are pre-canned packages you can find from just about every antivirus vendor out there. They're unobtrusive, they don't take long, and they're a good refresher, even for technically minded people. And really, it's very important to raise that awareness so that everyone's vigilant about opening up emails and visiting websites and clicking yes, those sort of gateways in that these attacks often start with. So I think that's very low cost, very low hanging fruit. Like I say, very much something I always recommend. With the rise of ransomware, I think it's increasingly important to have good contingency plans in place and good backup plans. You want to make sure that you can restore operations, not only in the event of Mother Nature, but from these ransomware attacks. And kind of related to that point, as we've seen ransomware evolve, one of the things that we've seen these attackers do is not just lock down your current data, but take a copy offline as well, and then basically threaten to release that data if they're not paid the ransom, whether or not you perform the backup. And so given that, I think the best mitigation is to just really analyze your data retention policies, your data access policies. You want to make sure you're following the principle of least privilege. That's a cybersecurity principle that I take near and dear to the heart. It's basically that someone that doesn't need permissions on something to do their job shouldn't have those permissions. And that's increasingly important with this new form of ransomware, to make sure that you're not overly exposing data to the outside world. Historically, we've looked at read-only access and haven't scrutinized that too much in the IT world, but we've reached an age now where it's important to even look at who has read access to data and whether you need all of that data stored in one place.
Those are really good points. And it's great that manufacturing plants are using more smart technologies to increase production and efficiencies. But I know a lot of manufacturers think that using those smart technologies can escalate the risk of cyber attacks. What do you tell those people who are concerned?
Well, they're right fundamentally. It is exposing the process, the asset, to greater risks. And so that absolutely needs to be taken into account in the cost benefit analysis of things. When you consider the cost of a product recall, or a threat to public safety, or a threat to worker safety, or a loss of a physical asset, these costs are huge. And so you don't want to be cutting corners with deploying this technology and with maintaining it. It's really important that you deploy this technology in a way that's sound, security wise, and that you maintain it, that you do those updates we talked about earlier. And that's going to add to their total cost of ownership. But I think history has shown, with IT gains, that the benefits far outweigh the cost in a lot of applications. And so even with that increased risk, it's just a matter of making sure you don't cut corners, that you don't get overly tempted and focused on the IT benefits and blind yourself to the risk, and end up in a place that's penny wise and pound foolish. You don't want to cut corners on that IT deployment.
Right. Now, I know tools like remote alarm notification software can help reduce cyber attacks and processing plants. Can you tell me more about how that works?
Fundamentally, it's through reducing the exposure of those SCADA and control systems. So remote alarm notification at its heart is about getting the right information to the right people at the right time. And if you look at that from a principal least privilege perspective, I think that those two really go hand in hand. So the idea of exposing an HMI screen remotely to an operator in the field, if you just take a step back and look at what are the people that are interacting with your plant, there's different roles there, and they have different roles, different responsibilities. They should have different permissions, and they need to have different access policies. And so a local operator, what makes sense for a local operator doesn't necessarily make sense for a remote operator. What makes sense for a local IT administrator definitely shouldn't make sense for a remote operator. And so I think you see an increasing number of organizations that, as we've moved to a more remote workforce, they've kind of taken a lot of the tools from IT and IT administration, and they've applied those to everyone remote. And they've violated that principle of least privilege in doing so. If you look at remote alarm notification, the idea is, well, instead of letting an operator access the HMI screen and then asking them to monitor that, to keep an eye on that, and to judge the signal from the noise, to be aware when one of those alarms that's occurring is actually for them, and that this is their time to act on it. Alarm notification takes that and becomes proactive, and then instead sends that message directly to that person when it's their time to act on it, when it's escalated up to them. And so not only do you see a more specificity in the role and the information that's going to the individual, but you're also just acting more efficiently that way. And that can also mitigate, if you are under some sort of attack, getting that information out, and having people that aren't suffering from alarm fatigue, that are more reactive to what's going on and more aware of the process, that seems to be beneficial as well.
Yeah, and I'm curious, why are SCADA systems more vulnerable to cyber attacks? And also, talking about remote alarm notification software, how does that provide a layer of protection?
Sure. So SCADA ultimately is, sitting at a crossroads where it's collecting up all of this information from the PLCs about your process, about your assets. And from a destructive attack perspective, it's also where you can trigger real harm. It's the control in the SCADA acronym that allows those attackers to actually change process variable values, which can do real harm, both to physical assets and to physical people who may be near those assets. And so SCADA is a target because it's so important to the operations. If you're looking at ransomware, ransomware is on the rise in part because there's crazy money to be had there. These attackers are following the economic incentives, and SCADA, because of that, has a big target on its back. It's important to a lot of enterprises that have deep pockets, and attackers know that. And so SCADA is always going to be vulnerable, but in particular, given current ransomware and economic circumstances, I think it's even more vulnerable. How does remote alarm notification sort of help with that? Well, I said, mentioning the idea of limiting the exposure to the SCADA system. One thing that WIN-911 does in our deployment is allow the WIN-911 processes to be deployed across different network layers. So if you have your SCADA back in the L2 network, your control network, you can have a series of firewalls protecting higher layers of your network, and WIN-911 can actually be deployed across those layers. So our source modules can be installed back in the control network, our escalation engine can be installed on the L3 network, our notifiers can be in the L35 network, and in doing so, you've created a nice secure channel where you can still get the right information out from the SCADA, that information that's so critical to the people outside, but you're doing so through a direct channel that is opening up small ports, opening up small exceptions, rather than a direct access to the SCADA environment or to its operating system host.
Well, Cody, this is a lot of information, but there's so much more to it to learn about cybersecurity as well as remote alarm notification. So I'm going to include some helpful links in the description for this video. And I really appreciate you talking with me today and helping out the industry.
Absolutely. No, happy to be here. It's Cybersecurity Month, so happy to help raise awareness of that. And thanks for having me.
And thank you to our viewers for joining us. I'm Teresa Hauk with the Journal Magazine. We'll talk again soon.